Though he lived at the dawn of the 17th century, Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio is considered by many to be the first modern painter. Techniques that are now common were first made popular by Caravaggio when he came on the art scene. Today we're going to take a look at this complicated revolutionary who inspired imitation and admiration throughout the ages. I'm Jenna Murphy, and you're watching Catholic Focus. For centuries, artists have served as tireless seekers of beauty, working on behalf of humanity to capture the impossible. Some artists have come closer than others to hemming in this elusive beauty. These are precisely the artists that have weathered the test of time. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio was one such artist. His art changed the world of art forever. Caravaggio's art, like his character, resists comparison, even today. Why exactly have artists like Caravaggio withstood the test of time? What is it that they offer, artists like these, that we cannot find anywhere else today? Here with me today in studio, I have Dr. Rebecca Smick. Thank you for joining us, Rebecca. We hope maybe you can answer some of our questions. Dr. Smick, you are an associate professor for Philosophy of Arts and Culture at the Institute for Christian Studies here in Toronto.
That's right.
Will you tell us a little bit about your work there?
Well, I teach Philosophy of Arts and Culture in an institute that is a faith-based institution. We're part of the Toronto School of Theology, but we deal primarily with the recognition that our philosophizing is governed also by our faith, how we orient ourselves to the world, through our religious convictions. So, and part of our understanding of one of the ways that we would do that would be through the arts. And so it's important to reflect philosophically on the role of aesthetics in how we live, say, a Christian life, the role of art in how we live a Christian life, and what have been the traditions for understanding the role of art and in this case religion, for example.
Right. In a time when many of our day have forgotten about aesthetics in art, could you explain to us a little bit about how your faith informs the way that you would view aesthetics and what that is? How do you describe that?
Well, the technical definition of aesthetics is sensual understanding. The understanding that we have, the knowledge that we have that comes through our senses as opposed to, say, through our intellect. And that's the traditional division between aesthesis, which is a Greek term, which has to do with the sensate, and sort of logical propositional reasoning, which is what we do, when we do mathematics or something like that. So in the 18th century, there was a moment when aesthetics became a branch of philosophy, out of the recognition that we do take in knowledge through our senses, through our eyes and through our ears and what we hear, etc. So in terms of art, aesthetics as a discipline of philosophy or branch of philosophy was very engaged with explaining why certain things affect us a certain way, why music affects our emotions the way it does, why the visual arts and the image produces such a profound effect on our emotions and on our thought processes, etc.
And do you think it's because of these things that you mentioned, that art, such as the art of Caravaggio, his work, do you think that's why it has been able to last this long and we're still so fascinated by it?
By him? It gets into standards for art, so why, that's an interesting sort of question in itself about why certain artists, stand the test of time. Why we as a community at large have decided that certain artists are really great artists and others say are not. I think if you accept that the way in which Caravaggio practiced as an artist, I think you could answer and say he stands the test of time because his art, working within the constructs of the period, gives us an incredibly good example of a creative character who was trying to bring into into the general public a way of understanding the, ecclesiastically based subject matter, usually from the church, and giving us sort of the best possible examples, the most compelling examples, the ones that at large would really grip people and make them be able to experience that subject matter that was being portrayed in the most profound way.
Right.
So I think the fact that he's such a master in terms of his naturalism, in creating certain kinds of dramatic effects, and doing it. I mean, there is something about Caravaggio that was a little, raucous in a way for his time period, and he was intentionally setting himself up to be in a position of critique almost of some of the traditional ways that the church had expressed certain subjects. So that's another, in the modern period, we really like that idea that he should be such a renegade, I guess you could say.
Was the time right, that you were speaking a little bit before, when we were speaking before our show, that Caravaggio, the time was ripe in the faith for him to come along, and we were talking a little bit, does art need religion, or does religion need art? Which came first, you know?
Okay, yeah.
So could you speak a little bit to the climate in which he was painting at the time?
Okay. So I think you can answer that question kind of historically. I think if you make your first question, does religion need art? I think you can start by saying that, since the earliest, we associate ourselves with the Cro-Magnon man, right? And one of the things that distinguished Cro-Magnon from, say, the Neanderthal was that they produced, this art that we found in the caves at Lascaux, or now in the caves at Chauvet. And the way we tend to see that art is that it probably is a religious expression insofar as the artist who was making these incredible images of mostly animals really felt that they were kind of trying to channel the spirit that was being expressed in the animal world and to get in touch with it by represencing it in the art that they were making. This is in primitive societies today, or you'll see the same notion in shamanistic art, for example, the desire to sort of use this material means that we have that creates an image, and that image becomes a way to capture something about the essence of what's being portrayed. So even in primitive cultures, you still have a kind of unease about a camera that takes your picture,
right,
and captures your spirit. It's a fearful prospect. And so in that regard, you can say that religion needs art, because art, understood in a very general way, is a material way, a sensual way, very much part of our own existence, that helps us have knowledge of these things, which are very, in some regard, kind of that you can't really capture in any other way. It's a kind of that spirit, that notion of capturing a spirit is capturing one of the mysteries of life itself. What is it? What is this human life and breath that we breathe, and the energy that it creates, and why does it stop? At death, we can give a physical explanation, but what is it about our relation to things beyond the human condition?
It is so mysterious.
Yeah.
What is the reason that you first were called into to study this area? Was it this very thing that intrigued you at the beginning?
Well, not so much. I think I came out of a milieu that no longer saw, when you ask the next question, which is, does art need religion? I think I grew up in a time period when art less and less needed religion. And so what drew me to it was, I went to art school, which was a somewhat dissatisfying experience. And I really wanted to know more about this whole tradition of art that has grown up, why it has this peculiar relationship, why contemporary art and modern art has this peculiar relationship to religion, especially when you look back and you think that for most of the history, Western history and Eastern history, art has always had some role to play in religion. So what's really happened that causes this change? And the period that I study, which is a moment in the Western tradition of philosophy, when all of a sudden you had a literature growing up that wanted to discuss what it is that the artist does. And that didn't really exist prior to, at the end of the Middle Ages, it became important to discuss. But by the time you get to the Renaissance, you have an incredible number of treatises that are being written that take up that issue precisely. And they're curious about religion, they're curious about what art does, what it accomplishes, how it does that.
Sure.
And so that's my area of expertise.
Interesting. So in your view, what is the need today that art fulfills, and how is that different from the need it fulfilled at the time that Caravaggio was painting?
Okay. Well, the definition of art has changed fairly dramatically, and some would say that there wasn't really a definition of art in the way that we understand it in the modern world until the 18th century, 19th century, even the 20th century, because the way we understand it to function is that you have these kind of creative people, creative geniuses, who we expect to communicate something to us about their own thoughts and feelings, about any particular subject, or even just about their feelings itself. And we expect them to do that in a very original way. And so that originality kind of pushes them to in a very subjective way, that we're interested in seeing what they think and feel about these issues. Sometimes it's issues, sometimes it's just what they're feeling at a given moment. So that's how we define what the artist does. And there can be a variety of subject matters that would interest the artist. It could be religion, it could be something else, it could be politics, it could be just the way they're feeling, it could be any number of things. But there is this real drive for originality. And some would claim that as a consequence of that, that we've basically turned art into having some kind of shock value. And that can have a religious function.
Sure.
Caravaggio
very much had a shock value in
yeah,
his time.
Exactly. And he was hoping to sort of create create an effect in the viewer that would kind of bring them to understand the subject matter better. So there's nothing intrinsically suspect about that. The difference between Caravaggio's time and, say, our own time would be that in Caravaggio's time there was more of also a focus on the greater subject matter. So he would be using whatever means were available to him artistically for a greater purpose. So in some sense this is an instrumental value for art, that it should be attempting to do something, persuade us of something that's maybe larger than one's individual emotions or thoughts. So the subject matter that you take on would have a greater significance and a greater importance. And we've gotten away from that because particularly at the very end of the 19th century, the 20th century, there was a movement towards art having a function just totally for itself. So this notion of art for art's sake. So what you do is you play down its instrumental value and you give it sort of a completely aesthetic value, where what you're trying to do is maximize its aesthetic effect without it necessarily being attached to a subject matter. And you want the artist to do that in a really original way, because we understand them to be these kind of creative geniuses who, the idea is to get them to do something different than the guy before. Yes. So as a consequence, with that notion, which is being addressed in a lot of the literature now, have we really turned art, have we really emasculated art by cutting it off from subject matters that are more profound than simply, what you happen to feel, or at a given moment, or what what is simply aesthetic affect without any subject matter at all, is being questioned, as we speak. So Caravaggio would be very much still participant in an artistic culture that expected the artist to be attending to greater themes than simply, what it is that art by itself accomplishes.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rebecca Smick, joining us here today once again. We're going to elaborate on precisely these points, and we're going to take a visit at the National Gallery in Ottawa. Pope John Paul II was particularly aware of the plight of artists and their importance for humanity. In his 1999 letter to artists, The late John Paul wrote that, "None can sense more deeply than you artists, ingenious creators of beauty that you are, something of the pathos with which God at the dawn of creation looked upon the work of his hands." A glimmer of that feeling has shone so often in your eyes when, like the artists of every age, captivated by the hidden power of sounds and words, colors and shapes, you have admired the work of your inspiration, sensing in it some echo of the mystery of creation with which God, the sole creator of all things, has wished in some way to associate you. There's no denying that God willed to associate Caravaggio in his divine recipe for worldly beauty. Dr. Christopher Etheridge is a curator at Ottawa's National Gallery of Canada. Some of the world's most renowned pieces have passed through his hands.
Caravaggio is working at a time when there's a great deal of doubt about what makes religious imagery, what's the role of painting and art in devotion and belief. And there's no real answer at the time, there's controversy. And Caravaggio is offering something new and different, but it wasn't totally accepted. He has important commissions for public altarpieces. Many of them are rejected. They're too controversial. This way of painting, this way of thinking about the biblical past and the saints isn't fully accepted by the entire church, and this causes enormous trouble for him.
Trouble is right. One of Caravaggio's pieces was widely criticized as blasphemous. The piece in question featured the Blessed Mother leaning against a wall, barefoot, casually cradling the Christ child, but it didn't end there.
Caravaggio he's very good at looking at the world around him. He's very good at looking at things, the reflection of light, shape, form, color. And he's also very good at looking at people, social relationships, or imagining their psychology and inner character. And that's what makes him unique as an artist, this real visual acuity. And he's brilliant at translating that into paint on canvas. It's not that he's copying what he sees, but he's looking closely, intently, and he's thinking about how to paint that. This St. John the Baptist in the Wilderness from the Nelson Atkins Museum is possibly one of his most famous works in the exhibit. It's painted with a remarkable brilliance and imagination and a great deal of economy, in the sense that he looks closely at the model and doesn't copy it but translates it. And as you look at this more closely, you can get a strong sense of how Caravaggio saw the world, his interest in light and dark, his sense of drama, his sense of personality. All that is there in this painting. His early works are what you'd call naturalist, so they look quite illusionistic. Real color, real flesh, real lighting, and that's what really made him different, this fascination with the real world and his ability to show it on canvas. And many artists rejected this. They said that art should be idealized, that it should be higher or better or nobler or different than the real base, crude material of this world. That's what made him controversial, this commitment to engaging with the world around him and thinking about how he could paint from it.
The art of Caravaggio and his followers brings the beholder into contemplation, and we have just learned why. It speaks eloquently of the dignity of the mundane. It communicates simple beauty with loftiness and supernatural ease. It reminds us of the sacredness of the moment and that our Catholic faith is an incarnational one. Art like this is eternal because so too are the values of truth, goodness, and beauty. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Catholic Focus. If you have any feedback about this episode or another, email us at focus@saltandlighttv.org. I'm Jenna Murphy. Until next time, God bless.